Hey, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Well, it's over now, isn't it?
Yeah, by
That was it.
24 hours. Yeah, but do you
I
do
know.
anything for Christmas? What do you? How's the
No.
atheist observe Christmas
Well, yeah. I
in the
mean, of
breach?
course, it's any people say that to me. They say, why do you celebrate Christmas if you're an atheist? And I say, because it's a day of the year. You know, it's like
I'm still
so.
alive. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a day. Well, so I eat and drink too much. Yeah, I
Uh,
do that the other 364 days. No, I do. I do celebrate it with no religious connotations at all.
mm,
Yeah, it's a day off for everyone. Usually get to see the family. Not this year because a couple of them have tested positive. So
hmm
no, just me and Jane and the cat eating and drinking too much for 24 hours.
Nice. Does the
So
cat does the
yeah.
cat also eat and drink too much
Uh,
in
I,
honor of
I,
the occasion?
well, it did notice a difference. It was getting a bit angsty because obviously Christmas lunch is later than usual,
Uh-huh.
and straight after lunch, the three of us usually have a little nap, right? So the cat was going, "There's something wrong here. It's 2:30 and we haven't had a nap." So and you could see it thinking something's wrong.
Yeah.
Something's just yeah. So yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was
Good.
good. I mean, as good as it can be without. I've realised what it is with all the with me anyway that I feel sort of anxious and worried about stuff. It's not knowing. It's the fact that I don't know what the government is going to say in 24 hours,
hmm
or I don't know what, if I'm going to cancel shows or be going anywhere. That's once I've said, oh, it's cancelled, I'm absolutely fine.
Right.
I'm absolutely fine. It's this, you can't plan anything, which I assume is the same for everyone, isn't it? Just this, if you don't know what's going to happen, that's a fear, isn't it? The unknown, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you're at the whim of our improvisations around COVID more than I am at the moment. I think I literally have
Yeah.
only one thing on my calendar for 2022 and nothing beyond. I mean, that requires an in-person experience.
I
So,
want to get to that.
yeah.
When once this
Well,
is
no, I mean,
because one thing rolls into the next. So
yeah,
by the time a project is finished, I've sort of started another one, and I wanna get over that. I wanna not put anything else in until one thing's finished, so I can have like a couple of days thinking, what do I do next?
right.
So yeah, I've got to get through January launching Afterlife 3, and then I want to start a new show. But yeah, there's things that are more fundamental. I even feel bad sort of promoting the show because I think of people at home who aren't working. They're thinking, well, this isn't gonna cheer me up enough. This show when
This,
I've lost my job
this
and
show
a
about
house.
death. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah. It's not going to cheer me up enough. Look, hey, everyone. I know we're going through a pandemic, but look on the bright
Let's
side.
talk about death.
I finished this show about
Yeah.
death. Yeah.
Yeah.
I started watching the Beatles thing.
Oh, yeah. How'd that strike you?
Yeah, good. It was it seemed loose at first and quite slow, but that sort of became its charm
Mm-hmm.
because it felt like eavesdropping. And I know he's done a good job and he's cut it down to, from 90 hours. It's a strange project. It's a
Yeah.
strange I've never seen anything quite like it before. It's also weird that it's, you know, 40 years after the
Yeah.
event.
No, it
Um
really is
or
eavesdropping.
50 years
Yeah.
after. And a couple of things struck me. I was immediately hooked in at the creative process
Right.
and how casual that was. They were coming up with things like, "Oh, what was this a riff?" And I thought they'd be bringing stuff to it, particularly as they were being filmed. And I
Yeah.
think that part of the charm of them was that they're not aware that they're the Beatles.
Right.
They are
Right.
four
Yeah.
guys in a room.
But
There's
but
no
they
airs and
really are at that
graces.
point. They really are the Beatles. I mean, they're about to break up.
Oh,
So
I mean, they've already seen 10 years of the biggest band on the planet,
yeah.
like the invention of modern pop music. And they were there at every single milestone, stereo, 4 track, 8 track, 16 track, 24 track. This thing that the arrangements, the musicality of a pop song. But stripped down, they were still just doing rock and roll. And I like the fact they were going back to songs. Remember that riff we had, Paul, when we were in
Mm,
the flat? Yeah, 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 it's
yeah.
good. Yeah, the
When they were
lyrics aren't very
teenagers,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, they were teenagers. Yeah, but I like the fact that they're bad lyrics. Oh yeah, let's do that. I also noticed that Paul is the general, without doubt,
Yeah, yeah.
musically, and he stepped up and said someone's got to take charge. I don't mean he's particularly the creative driving force, but he's the creative leader. He's the band leader by the look of it. But yeah, the thing that struck me most was that they were not aware that they were the Beatles, and it was quite charming. It was yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, well, as someone
yeah.
who's not musical and has no experience composing, it was interesting to watch for, I mean, just the social dynamics. I really could not figure out what Yoko was doing. I mean, that was really,
Well,
someone
I
referred
know
to
I
that
didn't.
as performance art, and it really, really was. I
Yeah,
mean,
I did.
she
I
just
mean,
insinuated herself into that situation and was just this unmovable object. I mean, just haunting every moment like a silent ghost. It was
yeah.
peculiar. I mean, I haven't finished watching it. I'm only a few hours in, but
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
probably less than you. I've probably watched an hour and a bit, but
Hmm.
yeah, I mean they didn't play on it. There's no
No, there's
there's no
nothing. Yeah,
unfair editing, but I mean it looked at first like it was like she was in Paul's chair.
right.
It was like some sort of metaphor for the.
Uh,
But yeah, we don't know. I don't buy into that.
yeah, no, I'm
I
not.
don't know. I don't know what happened, and
Yeah, that
I
she
don't.
broke up the band or something. I'm
No,
not alleging that, but
I would. I'd want some pretty concrete proof
yeah,
to assume that because you don't know, and they've been together 10 years, and you know
but
she was
still, it was
his
just
partner.
creatively and socially, it was
It was
peculiar. Yeah.
strange, it was strange. It was like we've just had the latest scandal in our government was they were having a drinks party during lockdown when people were dying and not being able to go to their
Hmm.
parents' funerals. And at first, like Boris Johnson, they're all there drinking, and someone says, "No, it's a meeting." But they're wearing suits, and they went, "Well, why
They
is his
always wear
girlfriend
suits.
there?
Yeah.
Why is his girlfriend there?"
Uh,
The first one of them said,
okay.
"Well, why'd you take your girlfriend
Right.
to a meeting?"
Uh, she's Yoko Ono.
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Um,
but
but yeah,
the other
but
thing that struck me though, that which I feel like I'm not well placed to appreciate, again, not being musical, but there's one scene, I don't know if you've gotten to it, where Paul McCartney seems to just come up with a song in about 90 seconds. I mean, I think the song is Get Back. And
oh yeah,
I guess you don't
yeah.
know how much he already brought to it, but he really just seemed like he got from zero to like 90% of
Yeah, well, you
of the
can. I
single.
mean, you can do things like that, and you can have a thing, and it just all works in your head, and it comes formed, and
Hmm.
and some people write everything like that. And I think the beauty of the Beatles was they didn't seem particularly complex or challenging or pretentious. It
Right.
was sort of they started on 12-bar blues, and they did use rock and roll lyrics that were sort of nice and airy and throwaway, certainly in
Hmm.
the early days. But yeah, what was strange was you were seeing the event. That's what's strange. In all the legend, you sort of seem to see the event. It's that question that I've got asked it, and I'm sure we've talked about it. So, if you could go back and witness one event, what would it be? Now, in whatever you chose, right, it would probably be painful. It wouldn't all happen in 30 seconds. In real time, it would be. Imagine if I said, I'd go back and watch Einstein work out the theory of relativity.
Right.
Well, I'd be there for 9 years, just waiting. No, there'd be a lot of making cups of tea, But here, it seemed that you saw the spark and you saw it finished, which was very exciting, I think.
If
And
memory
I think
serves, I think there'd be a
yeah.
lot of his wife banging on a locked door. I think he was not a great husband, old
Right.
Albert.
Well, I wonder. Well, again, that's the worry, isn't it? You go back and witness something great, and then they lock the door and draw the curtains, and they do something you shouldn't be watching, and
Hmm.
you want to, you scream as a ghost, "Get me out of here!" He's playing with himself. This Einstein's a dirty pervert. What's he doing? Um, yeah,
The world's greatest onanist.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. And he did it between E and equals. Every gap
every
he got to E.
every equation.
Right, he went E equals I got him. He goes, I deserve a little me time. And you go, oh, fucking hell. You're sitting there just like looking away.
Every
You,
equation is
it's,
covered with jizz.
yeah. Right, good. Well, it started off
So
well.
we
We
did that.
started off talking about the
Yeah.
creative process, and
It's,
then
it started
we
with Christmas.
we ended up with Einstein wanking. Brilliant. What a highbrow podcast this is. Right, okay, get into the science of it.
Hmm.
I've got so many questions about that thing I sent you. It's been bugging me
Oh,
all week, and I've been researching it, but of course I can't ask the internet specific questions, right? So there was an article which I sent you. It was a brief article, and it didn't go into much detail. I think it was it in New Scientist? I can't remember the
yeah,
link.
yeah. I don't know where the original was published, but yeah, it was.
So they stuck some brain cells in a petri dish. They did some sort of interface, which I don't know how they did it, but they made it learn and play the video game Pong,
Hmm.
right?
It's
Now
funny.
I've got
I
so many
remember when my,
questions.
I remember my brain's first exposure to Pong. I was of that. You might have been. I think you're just enough older than me, and I don't know what was happening in the UK that it might not have hit you in the same way. But when I was, I don't know, something like 10, Pong came out. They would have these dedicated machines in various restaurants, and it was all it could
Yeah,
do. Was the one game was Pong, and it was
yeah,
fantastic. And I just remember the dawn of a new age. I mean, no, then the Atari came out, and that became an obsession. It also had Pong.
yeah.
Yeah,
That was when you could play against someone else.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah. So this, they had it playing against itself, just the little what do you call it? The paddle that would move up and down and get in the way of the ball, bounce it back off the wall at different angles, and so it learned to play that. Now
Hmm.
I've got so many questions, right? One,
Hmm.
where did they get the brain cells from? So they were living brain cells by definition from a brain. Now,
Hmm.
where did they get those from?
I forgot. What do we know they were human brain cells? Because I
Well,
don't remember if
okay,
it
well, even
specified that.
if they weren't,
Well,
uh, uh,
it's trivially easy to answer the question if they're not human. I mean, because and they
they just
certainly
scraped them
wouldn't.
off a rat. Yeah,
Yeah, they wouldn't need to be because our brain cells are scarcely distinguishable from other
that was my
mammalian
next
cells. Yeah.
question. So it's like blood cells. They do the same thing. There's nothing. So what's human about the brain is the fact that how many brain cells there are and how they're arranged. And so
Yeah.
if you could, so in theory, again, I'm making Cartesian leaps here that might be above my station, but could 1,000 rats get together and have a bigger brain? Does it work like that? Is it pure volume? Is it
Yeah.
pure numbers and volume that make the brain bigger, rather like loads and loads of primitive computers making a supercomputer?
Yeah. Well, it is a matter of size mattering, but it's also organization. I mean, it's not just that the human brain is a larger or the largest primate brain or a very big rat brain. It's organized differently, and there are a few subtypes of neurons that are distinct or basically distinct for humans, but most of it is just almost indistinguishable cells that are organized a little differently, more densely in areas and etc. But it's
So for our discussion, imagine it was. I don't think we have to go into the moral aspect of it anyway. But supposing we probably can take a couple of brain cells and not hurt anyone. So supposing
mm,
it was a group of, how many are we talking for this to be able to run a pong machine? What are we? I mean, we've got billions. So what are we talking? A
I,
thousand?
actually I don't know. I mean, this is not work that I've ever been anywhere near, but it's I mean, I could imagine it need only be some thousands
Right. Okay.
to play Pong.
So a little
Yeah.
scrape of phlegm on a day. Now, what is the interface? How do they connect to that machine? What is the physical outside metaphor? How do you connect a blob of
Mm.
brain cells to a thing? How do they become cyber cells?
Well, in this case, I don't know. They might have a more sophisticated way of doing it. I mean, this work was just done in we have all kinds of microelectrodes and interesting things now. Traditionally, you could only sample from fairly large sets of neurons, human or mammalian neurons, and influence them with current. I mean, it hasn't been super precise, and that's why traditionally a lot of work was done in giant squid neurons and other neurons that were just structurally much larger, where you could actually insert an electrode. But I don't know
So
what they're
it's
doing here.
literally so it's literally like some sort of conductant, and then the brain on the conductant, the other end linked to a current linked to what we then know as the average electronic thing. So,
Yeah, but here
oh,
they might
yeah.
have devised some way of putting neurons on some kind of integrated circuit of some kind. I mean, I don't know. They might have done something interesting that I didn't read about. But
What,
the
rather like a silicon chip is just
yeah, I mean,
there and
because obviously
connected.
that is so miniaturized at this point. I don't know if there's a way of integrating you
But
know
I sort of
tiny circuits with neurons. I mean, this is not something you could do in a living animal's head, but you could. I would imagine you could do something pretty interesting in a
But
dish
how do
at the
they
moment.
connect? How did they that thing we talked about, how did they connect the person making the machine talk?
Well,
What is that then?
yeah. So I mean, they have ways of putting electrodes near groups of neurons that are seemingly dedicated to the relevant function, right? So in this case, forming a motor plan, premotor, supplementary motor cortex, or motor cortex, and so you're not in this case you're not actually inserting a tiny wire into an
Right,
individual neuron. You're inserting a wire close to assemblies of neurons that are having an aggregate firing pattern. They're
right.
all getting active or getting deactivated in unison.
And is
And
there something to see? Like if I was God and I could look in someone's head, could I see what was happening? So the neuron fired, we had a thought, we wanted to move our arm, would we'd physically see something happen, wouldn't we? We'd see a bit of electricity leave that neuron, would we? And cause the arm to move?
yeah, well, yeah, I mean
Is something
that's what I
yeah.
mean. Neurons are at the end of the day, or at least at the output level, wires that are conducting electric current, and that's getting finally affected on muscle cells that are contracting by virtue of receiving that current.
But what
Um,
is the information though? What is literally the information? I understand it when it's a record on a turntable. The grooves, affect the needle in a certain way, and it's translated into sound. But and I even sort of I can even imagine what a silicon chip does. The
mhm.
same sort of thing as sort of reading a circuit board. And but what is it with thought? What is it like Wi-Fi, or is what is the thought? This is what I can't get.
Well, it's still somewhat mysterious at the level of what is the neural code ultimately. I mean, how is a memory encoded? In what part of the neuron are there interrelationships? What's the necessary and sufficient condition for making something a durable memory trace? I don't think we actually know at this point. But it's different to say what is a motor output, right? Based on some decision to move, what constitutes executing a movement from motor cortex. That is a much more straightforward case of whether or not specific neurons fire and what they're connected to. So the information's being transferred in that way. But
So
as far as what's actually, your knowledge of, anything we were just talking about, but Paul McCartney as a term that ushers in a range of associations whenever it's invoked. I mean, the fact that you recognize the sounds I just made as someone's name,
mm,
and the fact that you have any memory at all associated with
yeah.
those sounds, it's not yet understood what is accomplishing that. I mean, at some level it has to be down to the actual physical structure of the
Well,
connections
exactly.
between
So
neurons.
so are those neurons okay, can you have such a thing as a clean neuron? So if you took those brain cells to play
Mm.
pong from a person, presumably, do individual neurons have any
Yeah.
trace of the person that they come from, or that's so minimal that it's like all this, however it's stored, it makes no difference. There's so one brain cell wouldn't be better than another, whether he was a scientist or a, because it's just so it's just the building block of something. It's that they have no trace, they have no memory, they have no more intelligence than a rat's,
Well, yeah,
or,
yeah.
or
When you're
whatever.
when you're
So,
talking about specific cells, that's almost certainly true. Although, yeah, I mean,
mm,
your cells have your DNA in them. Because they're yours. I mean, so the nucleus in any specific neuron would have your DNA and not someone else's, and not a rat's. But in terms of the functionality, the input output characteristics
it's the
of a
same,
single cell, you would expect it to be the same. And
right?
yeah, I
Okay,
mean,
well that
there's a few distinctions because we again there are neurons that mammals have that insects don't appear to have, and there are neurons that humans have in great abundance. That
But broadly speaking, in these numbers, these neurons don't have a memory. Blood doesn't have a memory. It doesn't. There's no personality. There's all
right.
this mumbo jumbo of like they took the blood of a serial killer and now the bloke's going around murdering people, right? So we know that's nonsense. So they're, it's like buying a blank cassette, right? These things, they all work. They all work. They're all the same. There's no memory from the person. So in this article, it said that it was like being plugged into the matrix. They called them, they became cyber cells, so to speak. And it said, and it was the language that pricked my ears up, right? It said the cells believed they were the paddle of the game.
Hmm.
Believed.
Hmm.
Believed they were the paddle. What does
Yeah.
that mean?
Well, that's slightly poetic language,
I hope so, yeah.
but it's in terms of you're talking about cells that now have been tuned, or trained to do something, and it's I mean, what
They
gets
trained
reinforced?
themselves. They weren't
Yeah.
trained. That's the point.
Well, no,
They
yeah, but
they
so
worked it out from
but based on
scratch, didn't they?
but based on specific inputs, they have begun to fire together. I mean, there's this phrase in neuroscience based on the firing characteristics of neurons, that cells that fire together wire together, right? So you get assemblies of coherent activity that get trained up, and all of this has evolutionary characteristics in a living intact brain. I mean, we learn to, our brain is not a blank slate. It's ready to get tuned up as visual cortex and auditory cortex, etc. But
Oh,
yeah, so
it's mind blowing.
you can do
So
this
these cells,
in a dish, apparently.
yeah, so these cells in a dish, they have no they have no consciousness on any level that we mean. They have no consciousness, do they? They're just, it is like blood on the ground. They're not thinking who they were or who they are. They're not thinking at all. They're just, it's like phototropism or something. They're just doing what they do.
Hmm. Well, so I
Is
mean,
that
this
right?
is what's happening. So in an intact brain, you have cells that are tuned. I mean, they're not born this way, but they are based on your sensory engagement with the world from the first moments of life.
Right.
You now have cells that are specifically dedicated to seeing faces, or recognizing
Right.
hand gestures. And I mean, it's even down to some evidence of, I don't know if this is held up of late, but back in the day there were so-called grandmother cells, or I think one was even called I think it was a Jennifer Aniston neuron, right? So the cells in various experiments that seemed to respond to specific inputs, and only those inputs. So in this case, you're firing in response to a celebrity's face or a celebrity's name. And, I think again, I don't know if I think it's reasonable to expect that you could have figured out some other stimulus that would have caused that Jennifer Aniston cell to fire. But yeah, I mean, we have their
So
cells
would there
whose
be,
business is fairly specific, and
supposing you've got enough of these cells, right? In there, you keep adding, this as just as a thought experiment. So it plays pong. You add a bit more. you have two petri dishes with different brain cells, and they each assume a paddle, and they're playing each other. And then you add a bit more to one, and he wins. Then you add a bit more to the other one. Is there a critical mass where we'd say, "Sorry, this is thinking now. This knows
Mm.
it's thinking stuff. We've made a brain. We've made a conscious brain." Would there be a critical mass of that, or would it just be like, again, more blood on the ground, more blank cassettes doing what they do? When does it suddenly? When does it tip that point, and we have this epiphenomenon, as we keep referring to it, where okay, this we don't explain this, but it's thinking now. It's got its own little
Mm.
Wi-Fi. It's thinking. Where is that?
Well, thinking is very different from consciousness, in my view. I mean, thinking is something that we can push down pretty far into information processing, and it can be happening in the dark. I mean, this is just it's more of a terminological choice, really. I mean, you could want to reserve the concept of thought for conscious thought, or you could push it back into unconscious thinking. And but I think if you're going to talk about intelligence and information processing that creates intelligence and creates competent
Right.
behavior, clearly most of that goes on in the dark for us, or seemingly in the dark, which is to say that the person I'm talking to now doesn't have conscious access to it, whether or not it might be associated with any consciousness elsewhere in what it's like to be you. It's not something you can inspect, right? So just take the fact that you know how to move your hand, right? Or that you can parse the sounds I'm making as language, right? Like all of
Yeah.
that is happening in the dark, and you're just aware of the part that you're aware of is the summation of all of that. You're aware of your successful ability to move your hand, and you're aware of if you couldn't for some reason, if you failed to move it when you tried, you'd be aware of the failure, but you can't inspect any of the stuff that is underlying that
But
performance.
hold on though. But it played Pong. It meant to
Yeah,
do
so
it.
but you
It was
but you don't know
playing
how you
Pong.
play. My point is, when you
You
play
I don't know
Pong,
how I play it,
you
no.
you have
But I
no idea how
do,
you do it.
because well, I do initially. If I'm learning the game,
Mm,
there would be a point where I went, "Oh, I know what I've
yeah,
got to do. I've got to get in the way of that little thing to make it bounce off the wall and then get back.
right.
I'll look out the angle and get back." Now,
So yeah, so but
there
so
must have
but
been a point where it did that. Those cells.
well, no, no. I mean,
No,
it
no.
doesn't need to have the verbose conscious
No, I
process that
know it
we
doesn't
have.
have the language and the explanation and the introspection, but what do you call it? What do you call a group of cells working out? They played it properly. It wasn't like they moved the paddle to the left
Mm,
and left it there, or randomly moved it back and missed the. It was playing it,
yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah. Although it wasn't playing it again. I think it was just a couple of paragraphs in that thing you sent me, but it was not doing it especially well. It was not doing it better than AI.
Boo!
It was just
God,
it was
tough
just
crowd.
it
Boo!
was
It
just
plays
doing
Pokemon. Yeah, I could beat. Sam Harris says he could
no,
beat
no.
any lump of brain
Any
cells in an
dish.
agar jelly.
Yeah.
Boo! But
No,
that's
but
trash
no,
talk.
but the point that no, but they sold it as it learned faster than an AI, but it was not as good as an AI, right? So it's like where there was something about the plasticity of,
Okay.
of biological cells that was efficient in the learning process, but in terms of actually mastering the game, we are losing to we're still losing to the robots there.
No, but that's interesting in itself that it learned. Now, okay, what does learn mean? Okay, what does
Well,
the
you have
term learned
you have
mean?
these networks of information processing units, whether they're biological neurons or artificial ones in AI now, which have a layered structure. So the inputs come in one end, and then there's layers of units that are connected to one another by various what are called weights, which are the degree to which the firing of one will affect the firing of the others to which it's connected. And you can adjust the strength of those connections, right? So there can be a connection where, if neuron A fires, well, then neuron B is guaranteed to fire, right? Or there can be a connection which is if neuron A fires, neuron B definitely won't fire. And it can be anything in between there. You can be more probabilistic than that. And so you can change these weighting relationships between information processing units. Again, this is happening biologically in a brain, and it's happening in machine learning networks. And on the basis of those kind of layers of integration, you get information processing, which is the basis of intelligence. I mean, it clearly is what is giving us. I mean, we're now building intelligent machines on the basis of this sort of structure, and it's structure that, interestingly, we can't really inspect to understand how it is. So, if with these machine learning networks, deep learning networks now they're called, that learn to play a video game, say, or learn to recognize faces as male or female, and they can do that in both cases better than human beings at this point,
Yeah.
or learn to play chess, say. At the end of the day, the people who programmed these machines and turned them loose on a training sequence don't know how they're actually wired to accomplish the task, because they wired themselves. They wired themselves in response to, in the case of like Alpha Zero, it played itself the game of chess, an uncountable number of times, and got better and better and better and became this near perfect chess engine. Or you turn some other network loose on billions of human faces, and you give it some feedback as to whether it's recognizing male and female correctly, and then it just
So
gets
it sort of
better and
becomes the concept then. It's like saying, how does maths always get it right? It's
mm,
almost like it doesn't make
mm.
sense for us to be outside the concept, which makes me think that on the one hand, consciousness it might as well be magic to me.
Yeah,
Even what you said there, like they don't know the interface, so that might as well be telepathy for me, which I
they
know
just know
isn't
that
true.
it's changing in response to its own performance, right? I mean, it's
Right.
designed to optimize for something, some outcome, and then we you can remain. It's a very Darwinian process, right? It's just selecting for
No,
better
yeah.
performances, right? So it's like, I mean,
Yes.
so we no more know what the ultimate structure is going to be than evolution knows what the ultimate solution is to the problem of how to survive in a given environment for a given type of species, and
Yeah.
what's going to play out over the next 1,000 years on an island. And so we've essentially designed the island, and
Yeah.
we put the animals in that context, and in many cases we've defined what success is going to look like, with
Yeah.
survival and reproduction. And let's say we're going to select for a specific outcome, like bird song, right? If you're not giving us bird song, well, you're not going to survive. But at the end, we're not creating bird brains. We're just creating the conditions where only better and better bird brains are going to succeed.
Well, I guess it's that because we are the machine, we've decided that intelligence and thought, introspection, poetry, art, all those things are the end game at the moment. We've arbitrarily decided the rules and what our aim is. Unlike evolution, who just sits around and says wherever it goes, and that's what's successful because it went there. And then we impose this arbitrary aim on it, even to the fact that we
Yeah,
think we're at the top of the tree because we voted. Only we voted, but it's mind blowing. It's still that cusp of.
but
I get it.
the
I get the
strange thing,
material
I
side
mean,
of it.
we're not
Yeah,
in certain cases we have a plan, but in so many cases there just is no plan, and we're not, and things are succeeding. When you look at cultural evolution and you look at
yeah,
what succeeds, right? What becomes
yeah.
the truly indelible meme that we just can't get rid of, for better or worse, right? I mean, it could be by virtue of the fact that everyone or nearly everyone enjoys it and finds value in it, or it could be just absolutely pernicious, and yet still we're stuck with it, right? We just can't.
Well,
Yeah.
we've got a question about that. As Max, this is a great question because I'm not sure what he means exactly, but we can deconstruct it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Max says, "How did we evolve as many mental health problems as we have?" Now, I don't know whether he means
Mm-hmm.
what literally happened or how can that be group selected if we say it's bad for us?
Yeah.
Or maybe he means, why do we call them bad? How do we know what's bad? We're
Mm.
we're deciding what's good and bad, aren't we? Based on loads of different paradigms, like happiness being one, do what makes you happy. But we'd say, well, hold on, serial killers enjoy skinning people and wearing their feet as hats. Do you know what I mean? So they I
I actually haven't come across a case with that final flourish.
Maybe I'm
The feet,
exaggerating.
the
I've tried to make serial killers worse
yeah,
than they are.
yeah.
I got I got
That is your innovation. I'm afraid the feet is hats part.
earmuffs.
Bad,
Yeah.
bad style. Yes, you've given us
He's got no
the
taste.
most
Yeah.
evil.
Yeah.
How can you degrade evil even further? You give it no style at
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So how did I think he means why. Why are they around, right? And
Yeah.
that we could just
Why
say, well, they're
why was it?
broken machines, but
Why
yeah.
wasn't something like schizophrenia selected out of the gene pool because it produces such dysfunction?
Yeah, we can explain that. We can explain that with the theory of natural selection, I guess. But he might mean, why now? Why are there so many now? And then that could be, well, we're just diagnosing more now, and but new
Mm.
things do make new mental illnesses, don't they? I mean, I'm sure the internet is probably coming up with 50 new ones now that haven't been seen before
Yeah.
and without
Well,
their
that's hard to figure out. I mean, there is this our concept of what mental health is a moving target, right? And so we keep diagnosing new things, and you can wonder whether or not they've always been there or they've just been given new provocations with technology and culture. But I mean, what's interesting about something like schizophrenia is that it does seem to be a fairly stable characteristic of every human population. As far as I know, something
yeah.
like 1% of every population can be judged to be schizophrenic. And it seems somewhat or entirely orthogonal to technology and culture, but in certain cultures it's obviously viewed differently. I mean, there are cultures where where I think you probably stand a better chance of being recognized as a shaman than being judged to be crazy
Yeah.
if you're hearing voices.
Well, it's all relative, isn't it? I mean, morality moves with the times. But is there a? I assume that all mental illnesses are based on some sort of group selection. That there might be an advantage in, anxiety is based on fear, which is a good thing to
Hmm.
have. If you're worried about something, your gut feeling, don't go into the cave. That are there any mental illnesses that are totally unexplained that aren't based on anything that could have happened before or been any evolutionary advantage, but they're just not getting selected out now because the process is
Right.
different?
Yeah. Well, so it's a problem. It's not just for mental illnesses. There are physical illnesses or propensities for illness that seem like they're probably genetically adjacent to something that is good in other contexts, right? So I mean,
Right.
there's some evidence for this where many of the genes that seem to govern high intelligence also deliver higher risk for certain physical diseases, right? Like muscle
Wow.
dystonias, and yeah. So like if it does suggest that if we found the genes responsible, I mean, it's not just a few; it's certainly hundreds at this point responsible for what we most value in intelligence. If we just ramped up their expression, we may not escape just putting an inordinate number of people into wheelchairs, right? I mean, it's just
Right.
there are trade-offs genetically which we may not be able to get around. But so there's some evidence that there's just a trade-off for many different things about us that are selected for. And so for something like schizophrenia, I don't know what that would be. I mean, obviously there's this ancient and somewhat misleading association between genius and madness that at least creative genius and madness that people have noticed, and I think there's probably something to it with a condition like bipolar disorder,
Well, yeah,
manic
because
depression.
I heard that, like, when people say, "Oh, he's a perfectionist," that you could also said that, he has a form of, a compulsive neurotic disorder
Hmm.
to a certain degree. That is that
Yeah,
true? That
well, I mean, everything
yeah,
taken to its ultimate extremity begins to look pathological. So I mean,
yeah,
and this is every good thing too. Yeah. So it's, being able to focus is great, but if you can never break your focus, well, then you're somebody sitting in the corner of the room talking to yourself. And yeah, but so like something like manic depression, there are many famous writers and artists and brilliantly creative people who obviously had bipolar disorder, and they suffered a lot from the depressive side of it, and also from the manic side of it, but were spectacularly creative in bursts, under mania.
and
Uh,
is that literally a chemical imbalance? Could that again, that could be reduced to some, a chemical missing or or it is physical, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
oh
a
yeah,
physical thing.
yeah. I
So,
mean,
yeah,
this is something that you take drugs for when it's dysregulating your life, when you've decided to go on Amazon and buy everything under a shopping mania.
right.
Yeah, yeah, people find their way to the psychopharmacologist after a few episodes like that. But the question is, what would be optimal if we could get our hands on all the
Yeah,
dials and
yeah.
tune everything to our heart's content? What would we find to be optimal, and what would be just a series of trade-offs that we would actually not want to accept in a static way? I mean, I think it's totally
But we know
possible.
that part of our success is that we're not all the same. That
Hmm.
the diversity, like what Edward O. Wilson was saying about, it only happens in like 20 species, and only
Yeah,
one major
specialization. Yeah.
species is us. It's specialization. So we do want brave people that run into a bunker and don't worry about death, and then we want people who are fearful and they're hiding in they're working out this cure for whatever.
Hmm.
So,
But I think you also
I
want it in yourself too. I think you would.
well, I think so. I think we have to talk about it differently with as the species and the individual. Because as an individual, I think we'd all agree that what we want is the longest, happiest life we can have. Is that?
Hmm.
Could we reduce it to that? Would we agree that we all individually what we'd want is the happiest life possible? Is that? I mean, can anyone argue with that?
Well, the devil's in the details of what you mean by happy, but I think, yeah. I mean,
Well, the
for me,
experience, just the experience machine. We want that, and we want it to be real. I
right.
think that,
But we
don't we?
also we want it to be fluid, and even over the course of a day, we want it to change in predictable ways. So, for instance, when you're trying to fall asleep at night, you want to be the sort of creature that can lose purchase on all of your experience. You want to be able to just surrender to sleep. You don't
Yeah,
want to be
that's
you
true.
don't want to feel the way you feel when you're on stage in front of 10,000 people. And
No,
when you're on stage in front of 10,000 people, you don't want to be the sleepy bastard who can't keep his eyes open,
that's
right?
true. But it doesn't change the truth of the statement. We want to be as happy as we can all the time
Right.
because
Yeah.
not sleeping wouldn't make me happy, but now sleeping would make me happy. So all
Yeah.
I've done is just, I haven't moved the goalpost. It's not my fault that I need sleep. So that's part of my happiness equation. I want to
But I
be
also
happy
think
all
you
the
want.
time.
I think you do want different things.
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, it's conceivable to me that there's some state of mind that if you could occupy it for a moment, you might say, all right, this is the state of mind I always want, right? Just give me this. I'll take this on stage. I'll take this while
Yeah.
I'm waiting for
That's
sleep,
yeah, 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 yeah,
and then
yeah.
I'll take this instead of sleep. Like, this is the mind of the Buddha, or this is as good as it gets. And any departure from this has got to be a net negative. I could imagine, you know, I mean, I've certainly had experiences where, in the middle of the experience, I've thought, all right, this has got to be more or less the center of the bullseye. But maybe not. Maybe there's a range of 100 such states that are pretty at the tails, pretty different from one another. Where this is the most creative, energized place to be when you're making art, and this is the clearest
But
place
you
to
wouldn't
be
care
when you're
about
thinking
art.
about
You wouldn't
science.
care about but you wouldn't care about why you did it. You wouldn't care whether you were the greatest footballer or the greatest painter. If you're in a state of
Hmm.
euphoria, sitting in your chair, just happy
Hmm.
for the rest of your life, you wouldn't start going, "I'm too happy here. I'm not doing anything." It's like
Well,
you'd be
you might. I mean,
would you? Why? Why
well,
would you
part
not
of
wanna be happy?
well, this is actually, I mean, this is now going into the esoterica of my mumbo jumbo, but there's a vast literature on the progress of insight that various contemplatives have, and in the Buddhist tradition and elsewhere, where they quickly or after lots of practice and lots of analysis, gradually begin to understand the subtle and subtler defects of specific states of consciousness, associated with specific degrees of concentration. So, I mean, if you take, there are meditation practices in Buddhism that are designed for pure states of concentration and pure states of mental pleasure. I mean, this is almost like this like the heroin path within the
Right,
meditation. And there are states of consciousness that have names like neither perception nor non-perception, or infinite consciousness, or, I mean, and none of these are, from the point of view of the complete instruction within Buddhism, none of these are considered to be ultimate goals. They're actually considered to be traps in the end, and you're meant to be able to ultimately see the unsatisfactoriness of even a state like infinite consciousness. And there, infinite consciousness doesn't refer to infinite awareness of all the things that you could. It's not omniscience. It's just consciousness without any, even the slightest intimation of structure, and therefore limitation, right? So there's no reference point to your body or to your past or to even your humanness, right? And,
so what's the difference between that and not existing?
well, because it's this incredibly expansive and vivid experience of awareness, of knowing that right? You're not knowing any specific sense data. You're not seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, or thinking, but the machine has not turned off. It's just pure being, with no suggestion of limitation, right? And this is, I mean, people have had these experiences on psychedelics as well. So this is not
Mm.
it's not that rare to have some intuition for this kind of experience being possible. But it is by its very nature, it's a temporary experience, right? Because first you didn't have it, and now you have it,
And have you
and it's going to go away.
you think you've reached that, do you? You think you've had that?
Well,
Do you?
I've had analogous experiences. I haven't trained, so I've done a fair amount of meditation practice, but I haven't trained in what are called the jhanas in Buddhist practice. That would be the specific concentration states that you would. I mean, it's like literally like a ladder of that you climb with
Right.
with greater and greater training and ability and concentration. And I haven't done that specific training, but I know people who have spent a lot of time doing that and had these experiences. But I've had, just by virtue of having some concentration on, long retreats, doing similar practices, I've had experiences that are very much like that, where there's no sense of having a body, right? And thoughts are no longer arising, and you're not obviously hearing or seeing or smelling or touching anything, and it's just this wide open field of awareness that is fairly undefined. I mean, I've definitely had that experience, and I've had certain experiences that are like that on psychedelics, and also experiences on psychedelics that are not at all empty of content, but the content has no reference point in certainly no reference point in my personal biography, but
And
even
you
note.
just went, "Must play Pong,
Yeah,
must
exactly. Yeah.
play Pong.
That's right. It's all,
I'm best at Pong,
but
champion."
so yeah, so there's Pong is actually, so compared to the first condition of just pure consciousness, Pong is actually a complication, right? I mean, Pong is ridiculously simple from the human side of things, but if you got nothing but awareness, adding Pong to it is a complication. But then there are other experiences you can have where it's incredibly complicated, but just also totally undefined by your personal point of view or even any reference point in human experience. I mean, it's just a kind of a transhuman state of mind. But again, the doorway there is marked with either LSD or psilocybin, very likely.
Right. And you don't see my first thought of it when someone says that is that when they say,
Whether I have brain damage or not.
"Whoa, no, that it's a that you see the drug as a a proper scientific enhancement or a
Mm,
gateway or that." Whereas I see it not anymore. Actually, I'm open minded to this, and I haven't had that experience, but I'm open minded that there could be something in it. Unlike it's like when you first told me about it, like you take LSD and you can suddenly see maths and hear green, right?
mm.
I think, oh, this is the same as someone who died for a minute and saw God, and we're all meant to go, well, no, he says he did. I go, yeah, because he was dead, and then he had a spark in his brain. He didn't see God.
Hmm.
I put it in that category at first, but
Except just to be clear here, that those are very different claims, right? Because
yes, I know
when you say you're seeing God, you're making a claim about what an experience
actually
means out in the
happened.
world.
Yes,
Yeah.
I
Whereas
know.
if you're
So
talking about
you're
I could taste the color green, you're
yeah,
talking about the character of your experience, which it doesn't have
yes.
any metaphysical reference
No,
point. Yeah.
no, that's right. Okay, okay. Well, yeah, okay. And no, I certainly see then, given those caveats and those definitions, that there certainly is something in it, and there's certainly truth. The truth of it is a real experience. But then, so is the person meeting God. If that's
Yeah.
the metaphor,
Yeah.
then they have as much validity as say that no, I did meet God and he said this and it's true,
Well,
even though we treat it like a dream.
there's no question that there are experiences that people have had that answer to that description. The real question is, what do they mean? Do they mean that the person has schizophrenia? Do they, or some other neurological disease? Are any of those experiences normative, psychologically,
Well, yeah, that's true.
or
Because if yeah,
yeah?
we
But I
wouldn't
mean,
argue if
there's
someone
no
said,
question people have had these experiences. I mean, otherwise
yeah,
you have to just imagine that everyone is lying all the time.
yeah, we'd be arguing with people if they said they had a pain in their leg.
Yeah,
We'd go, "No, you don't." They go, "Well, it's not for you to say." So someone could say, "Whenever I sit cross-legged and chant these words and eat this mushroom, I feel better than I do any other time." And we can't argue with that. If they sat there all day and we saw the bailiffs taking away their furniture and their wife left them, and we'd go, "This isn't good for you."
yeah.
But they'd be
This is
going, "I feel great. I feel great." And you go, okay, yeah, but one day you're going to wake up and you're going to have lost everything, and it's not going to be good. And you're not. You go, no, I feel great. When do we intervene? Why?
hmm.
When do we stop someone hurting themselves? By our definition, when they're having a great time.
Well, if I mean the measure of it.
Basically, Sam, I'll stop the drugs. Stop sitting around taking drugs, Sam. Right?
Yeah. Well, listen. It's Einstein we really had to worry about,
I
apparently.
know.
Yeah.
Oh, the mess.
Talk
The,
about the misuse of
yeah,
the human
yeah.
life.
I
But
think his little notebook was for sale at an auction house, and I was thinking, no, I don't. I'm not going anywhere.
they couldn't have gotten rid of it fast enough. Yeah. It's a
It's
bargain.
okay.
It's a bargain.
Oh dear.
A bargain at Sotheby's. Yeah. Nobody
You're not,
wants it.
I can't believe it. Last couple of weeks ago, you were slagging off Isaac Newton, and now I've had to go at Einstein. Now we're even.
Yeah.
Now we're even.
All right, so I just have
Good.
we're getting to the end of the year here. It's fast approaching. Do you have what do you do with your brain? Do you have any resolutions of any kind? Is there anything to change, or is it just cruising
Minor,
altitude?
minor, minor. From the mundane to the, I suppose, existential. I want to do things like just throw stuff away. I want to make a little podcast room that I meant to
Mm-hmm.
be doing for the last 3 years.
Nice.
I want to get healthy, but everyone says that, and I say it every year. It's almost like I want to sit down and work out what I want.
Yeah.
That's always the big question because I have these ideas and I think that's rubbish. I don't just mean creative, but what you know and I suppose I am thinking of like, what am I going to do? I might have a really good 10 years. I might have a good 10 years and an average another 10, and I might have a
Mhm.
terrible 5. What am I going to do? What am I going to do with those? So it gets a bit too
Mhm.
practical. It
Yeah.
gets like even things like am I gonna am I gonna buy the biggest house I can afford with a tennis court for 10 years of
Mm.
playing tennis before I have to start moving into a bungalow with so I don't have to do stairs anymore.
That's right. Yeah, the considerations change, don't they? Well, so
Yeah, good. You?
well, judging from my behavior, I mean, I could give you a good story about what I intend, but looking from the outside, if you had a camera on me, apparently what I want to do, what I've resolved to do, is now eat ice cream every night of the week.
Yeah,
there used
I
to,
know.
there used to be
Yeah,
it used to be so that the rule for our
yeah,
daughters is you can only have a dessert like that on weekends. So Friday and Saturday night, they always
yeah.
want ice cream, and so we have ice cream Friday and Saturday night, and then Sunday night, the ice cream goes away. And it used to be that I would follow the rule just out of solidarity with the kids, but but now I just eat ice cream in front of them on Sunday and Monday and
That's
Tuesday.
fantastic. That's
And
fantastic.
when they demand some defense of this behavior, it's just the prerogative of adulthood.
Yeah,
Just
do you remember that?
unaba like this. You'll be able to do this when you're my age. It's
Do you remember
basically.
that thing that either I don't know if it's true that traditionally if a father caught his 10-year-old smoking a cigar, he
Mm,
made him smoke 10 cigars and he
right.
never smoked again. That doesn't work with ice
No,
cream.
it doesn't.
It doesn't
It does not.
work. Good.
Anyway, I wish you the happiest of New Year's, and let me support the podcasting studio aspiration that you have there. That would be fantastic. So,
Yeah, I'm gonna. I'll I'll forget it immediately. I say goodbye. And we talked about this, didn't we? The one of my favourite things from The Simpsons is when Homer thinks he's going to die and he does his bucket list.
uh-huh.
You know, it has 24 hours, and then they realise they made a mistake and he's not going to die. And he goes, "I'm going to live my life to the fullest." And over the credits, he's just watching telly, eating a big bag of chips.
Right.
It's brilliant. It's just so perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.